Okay, it's time to start. Dear colleagues and audience, and welcome to attend Professor Gila Sher's set lectures on a series of truths of human value at Wuhan University. From Wikipedia, Gila Sher is an American logician and a professor of philosophy at the University of California, San Diego. She has worked extensively in the theory of truth and the philosophy of logic. Sher is a leading advocate of foundational holism, a holistic theory of epistemology. He got his PhD from Columbia University in 1989. Her area of specialty are truth, epistemology, philosophy of logic, areas of competence, logic, language, metaphysics, analytic philosophy, Kant. She is the editor-in-chief of Sciences from 2012 to 2017. Also, she is editor of the top journal of Philosophy, from 2017 to present. He has several nice books. For example, Logical Consequence, which is forthcoming, Epistemic Friction, an essay on knowledge, truth, and logic, published by Oxford University in 2016. The Bounds of Logic, a generalized viewpoint, published by MIT. Truth of Human Value in Processing, and his forthcoming new book titled Epistemic Freedom, an essay on logic, truth, and logic. Also, she is co-editor of the book Between Logic and Intuition, Essays in honor of Charles Parsons. This is her book, Epistemic Friction. This year, Professor Cheng invited Professor Gila Sher to do 3 lectures on truth of human value at Wuhan University. Previously has given 2 lectures, Post-Truth Crisis, The Value of Truth, and tonight she will give the 3rd lecture, Moral Truth. Today we have the interlocutor, Professor Yong. He got his PhD from St. Louis University. Now, he is professor and the vice dean of School of Philosophy at Wuhan University. He is also the editor-in-chief of the book series of Contemporary Chinese Philosophy and a member of Sunday Interdisciplinary Journal. Okay, now it's time for Professor Gila Sher's lecture. Let's welcome her lecture, please.
Okay, first I would like to thank Professor Cheng Yong for the very nice introduction, and I would like to thank again Professor. The combination of 1 and 2 means that we need norms and standards of correctness to guide us in our epistemic journey. These include the norms and standards of truth, evidence, justification, and so on. Such norms and standards, however, would be useless if we did not have the cognitive wherewithal to discover our errors, retrace our steps, correct our theories, and figure out how to continue our epistemic pursuits, which again will require norms and standards of correctness. The centrality of these norms and standards to our vision of our humanity turns them into a full-fledged human value, the human value of truth. In the last lecture, we also saw that our value of truth is a correspondence value rather than a coherence or a pragmatic value. It is a correspondence value not in the narrow sense of being a copy, mirror image, or even a direct isomorphism value. but in the broader sense of connecting our statements and theories to the world in a way that renders them correct. What is the structure of this connection depends on, one, how that part of the world which is targeted by what we say is, and two, how we humans can or do cognitively reach this target. Considering mathematics, we explained how in this field the pattern of correspondence may be more complex than, say, in everyday physics. The correspondence condition of a sentence like 1 plus 2 equals 3, for example, may be 1 plus 2 equals 3 is true if and only if, on the level of posits, the operation of plus applied to 1 and 2 gives the number 3, if and only if, on the level of the world, this joint union of the second level cardinality properties 1 and 2 gives the second level cardinality property 3. This instead of the simpler root of correspondence, which would be 1 plus 2 equals 3 is true, if and only if, on the level of the world, the operation plus applied to the numerical individuals 1 and 2 is 3. In today's lecture, we will start with 1. What is the moral dimension of truth? And in order to answer this question, we will discuss 2. What are moral values? Then we will proceed to the question 3. Is there moral truth? And if the answer is positive, to 4, what pattern of correspondence is exhibited by moral truth, or what does moral truth correspond to? The first 2 questions are what is the moral dimension of truth and what are moral values. Let me begin again with the basic human situation. This time, the basic human moral situation. The basic human moral situation, like the basic cognitive epistemic situation, consists of certain needs, problems, desires, and visions. Here I limit myself to a few basic observations that provide us with an initial starting point for the discussion of the moral dimension of truth. I will start with the basic moral situation underlying human values in general and moral values in particular. The basic human moral situation. We live in a world with other humans. This world, together with our psychological makeup, generates severe conflicts that require a resolution. The need to resolve these conflicts leads to the creation of moral norms. Hume described this situation as follows. Morality takes its rise as a remedy to a conflict between certain qualities of the human mind and the scarcity of worldly resources, in comparison with the wants and desires of men. If every man had a tender regard for another, or if nature supplied abundantly for all our wants and desires, there would be no need for moral norms. Hume, 1739-40. Another way to characterize the genesis of these interpersonal conflicts is in Darwinian terms. But interpersonal conflicts are not the only source of moral norms. 3. Our moral norms are also grounded in our vision of a life in which humans relate to each other in a way that is captured, if only in part, by the Kantian idea of a community of ends in themselves. In this community, every person treats both herself and others as ends in themselves, and not only as means to some other end. Where treating someone as an end means treating him with respect and dignity, appreciating his autonomy, and viewing his humanity as intrinsically valuable. All this requires a capacity for sympathy and empathy, mind reading or understanding, a significant degree of autonomy or freedom of choice, a certain level of intelligence, and so on. But to the extent that these conditions are satisfied, this vision of humanity as a community of ends is another source of moral values or moral norms. The moral norms are so central to our life and humanity that they arise to the level of human values. It is important to recognize, though, that the moral values are not forced upon us. We are not forced to abide by these norms. We are able to violate and abandon these norms both in our relations with other humans and in our relation to ourselves. The vision of a community of ends in themselves, too, is not forced upon us. This vision itself is an act of freedom and choice. As such, it is not guaranteed to last to the end of human life or rational life more generally. It is a vision that was threatened many times in the past and is threatened today as well. It is fairly easy to see how this vision of a community of ends in themselves, living in dignity and mutual respect, leads to the moral values and the associated norms of justice, love, freedom, equality, and so on. But how does it lead to the value and norm of truth? In what sense is the human value of truth not only an epistemic value, but also a moral value? One way to arrive from our moral vision of our humanity to the human value of truth is through the moral norms of dignity and respect. To treat ourselves and others with respect entails being truthful. Under normal conditions, lying to others involves disrespect, and lying to ourselves is losing our dignity. It is important to recognize, however, that the moral value of truthfulness is intimately connected with the epistemic value of truth. The two are two faces of the same value. To be truthful with another person is to tell her things that are true in the epistemic sense. Moreover, it means to seek the truth in your dealing with others, both personally and when, for example, you are a member of a committee investigating murder or corruption. Truth is always correspondence truth, And the moral value of truth is the value of telling what is true in the correspondence sense and seeking truth in the correspondence sense. But what is correspondence truth in the moral domain? Is there truth, real truth, correspondence truth in the moral domain? Are sentences such as saving life is morally good and murdering children is morally bad true, not just in a manner of speaking, but true in fact? In order to answer this question, in order to understand whether and what truth is in the moral domain, I will follow the methodological principle look and see, emphasized by Wittgenstein. Don't decide in advance whether and how correspondence works in a given field, but look and see. There are, however, skeptical questions concerning the applicability of truth to morality. Question: why would anyone think that truth in ethics is based on correspondence at all? One answer is, being a realist about ethics is not so unusual. That is, it's not so surprising that we might think that there is truth in ethics. There are many other people who held and hold this position. A number of philosophers are realists with respect to ethics, believe that morality is objective. See, for example, David Enoch's book, Taking Morality Seriously, A Defense of Robust Realism, from 2011. These philosophers believe that either it is the case that killing people for pleasure is morally wrong, or it is the case that it's morally okay to kill people for pleasure. Since, or to the extent that this is a matter of fact, it is reasonable to think that the truth value of 1, it is wrong to kill people for pleasure, is based on this matter of fact, and therefore 1 is true or false in the correspondence sense. But there are also objections to moral truth. Metaphysical challenge to correspondence truth in ethics. The metaphysical challenge has 2 dimensions. Dimension 1, queerness of moral objects or objective values, Mackey, 1977. Mackey says, if there were objective values, then they would be entities or qualities or relations of a very strange sort, utterly different from anything else in the universe. I have already addressed this issue in the last lecture. The queerness challenge has been refuted quite easily. And here is a citation. The world is a queer place. Neutrinos, aardvarks, infinite sequences of objects, impressionist paintings are peculiar kinds of entities. But this is not an argument against science, nuclear physics or zoology, formal semantics, art history. This argument was given by Platz already in 1980s. The second dimension of the metaphysical challenge is anti-scientific spirit. Scanlon in 1993 describes this challenge as
a problem about how to fit moral truth into a scientific view of the world. Response: we can understand the scientific view of the world either very narrowly or more broadly. If we understand it very narrowly, then the objection is not specific to ethics. A very narrow conception of scientific view of the world would require us to reject correspondence truth in cognitive psychology because it talks about mental entities, in mathematics, and in other fields or subfields as well. But if we adopt a broader view, we can in principle accommodate correspondence truth to the scientific spirit in all these fields. Note, the two major approaches to morality in the history of philosophy affirm or can be construed as affirming the factuality, reality, objectivity of moral values. And these are the Kantian approach and the Millian approach. Although these two approaches are different in certain respects, they can be construed in a way that establishes the factuality, reality, objectivity of moral values on similar grounds. Kantian conception of moral values. Let us focus on the moral values of duty. The moral values of duty, e.g., the value of saving human life, are based on the categorical imperative. The categorical imperative, in turn, is based on the rationality and freedom of human beings. And the rationality and freedom of human beings, according to Kant, is real or objective. It follows that the reality, objectivity of the moral values of duty is based on something real and objective, the reality, objectivity of human rationality and freedom. Accordingly, these values themselves are real or objective. 2. Millian conception of human values. The moral values, e.g., the value of saving human life, are based on the principle of maximizing well-being. The principle of maximizing well-being is grounded in psychology, rationality, and freedom. Psychology, rationality, and freedom are real or objective. It follows that, again, the reality or objectivity of the moral values is based on something real, the reality or objectivity of psychology, rationality, and freedom. Once again, the moral values themselves are real or objective. In the last lecture, we saw that we can have truth in mathematics without committing ourselves to the existence of mathematical individuals. That is, we can have some kind of indirect correspondence truth in mathematics. It is quite possible that we can have truth or correspondence in ethics without committing ourselves to moral facts. To understand truth in mathematics, we had to understand first what is real about mathematics. And we saw that what is real about mathematical truth about mathematics is that objects and properties of objects in the world have mathematical or formal properties such as cardinality properties. This is the basis of correspondence truth in mathematics. to understand truth in ethics, we have to understand what is real about ethics. And we already saw that one thing that is real about ethics or morality is that humans, that is we, have moral values. This is the basis of correspondence truth in ethics. The answer to the question, what does correspondence in ethics consist in? We need to answer the question, what systematic connection holds between an act being morally true, morally good, and the moral values. But the answer to this question is quite clear. That is to understand why there are moral truths and what their truth consists in. We have to understand the connection between things that can be morally good and the moral values. But as I mentioned, the answer to this question is quite clear. What is morally good or bad are actions, things that we do. Under what conditions is doing X good? When it is in accordance with our moral values. We have seen that moral values are objective and that there is a fact of the matter as to what the moral values are. This is enough to treat moral values as part of the world. They are something created by us, but many parts of the world were created by us. Tables and chairs, social and political institutions, and so on. We can thus say that objectively, doing X is good if and only if doing X is positively correlated with the human moral values. Morality involves a positive correlation between one, human actions, and two, moral values. Example, the act of saving John's life is good if and only if this act is positively correlated with a relevant moral value, in this case, the moral value of saving life. We are now ready to proceed to truth. Correspondence in ethics does not need to be a simple or a direct relation, such as copy, mirror image, or direct isomorphism. What correspondence in ethics is depends on what in the world makes actions morally good. What makes them morally good is the existence of a positive correlation between them, these actions, and relevant human values. And this is the key to understanding correspondence truth in ethics. Doing X is morally good. The sentence, doing X is morally good, is true if and only if doing X is positively correlated with a relevant moral value. For example, saving John's life, the sentence, saving John's life is good, is true if and only if saving John's life is positively correlated with a relevant moral value, that is, saving life. Since saving life is a moral value, and since saving John's life is positively correlated with this value, the sentence saving John's life is good is true, is in fact true. Okay, it is in fact true because the action it describes, saving John's life, is positively correlated with the moral value of saving life. If we had instead the sentence, killing John is good, then since killing John is not positively correlated with a relevant moral value, then killing John is good is not true, it is a false sentence. If this understanding is correct, then there is something notable about moral truth. Moral truth involves double correspondence or correlation. That is, the pattern of correspondence in the case of morality involves two correlations, not just one correlation as in physics or mathematics. Good, just like true, is a correlation term. Action X is good if and only if X is positively correlated with moral values. Sentence X is true if and only if X, or what X says, is positively correlated with what is the case in the world. So here we have truth applies to another normative value, to another normative sentence. Action X is good. And so what we have is double correlation. Example, again, the act of saving John's life is good if and only if this act is positively correlated with moral values, saving life. And the sentence Snow is white is true if and only if this sentence is positively correlated with what is the case in the world regarding snow. So we see that there is a certain similarity between the structure of truth sentences in general and moral sentences in general, and that affects what truth is in a moral case. Result, truth in the moral domain involves double correlation. Truth correlation or correspondence and goodness correlation or correspondence. Truth correlation with the world and goodness correlation with moral values. If in the world, in fact, there is a correlation between goodness and a certain moral value, then there is truth correspondence with the world or objective truth correspondence between a sentence that speaks about the goodness of a given act and the human values. Doing X is good is true if and only if doing X is equivalent to or is correlated with a relevant moral value. Two correspondences or two correlations. In contrast, when we talk about a sentence which is not a moral sentence of the form PA, PA is true if and only if A has the property P, one correspondence. Question: can our proposal handle morally bad? Answer: yes. Doing X is bad, is morally bad. The sentence doing X is morally bad is true, if and only if doing X is negatively correlated with the relevant human value. And we might add that the sentence doing X is bad is neither true nor false, if and only if doing X is not correlated with any relevant moral value, either positively or negatively. Let me give an example. For example, losing money on a bet is bad. The sentence losing money on a bet is bad is neither true nor false, because losing money on a bet is neither positively nor negatively correlated with any relevant moral value. Question: why does truth in ethics involves two correlations and truth in physics only one? Answer: because ethics is normative in a way that physics is not. Normative concepts are correlation concepts. They are correlated with certain values or certain body of laws. Therefore, truth in the normative domain involves two correlations. Good is normative. The expression good is normative. Hence, a correspondence notion. Hence, it is a correlation notion. Correlation between good and moral values. As a result, X is good is true involves two correlations. A correlation between X and a moral value, and a correlation between this correlation and something in the world, that is the objectivity of this correlation. The same holds for the legal domain. The expression legal, the predicate legal, is normative. Hence, it is also a correlation notion. There is a correlation between is legal and a legal code. Accordingly, X is legal is true involves two correlations. For example, the sentence abortion is still legal in the United States is true if and only if the legality of abortion accords with or is correlated with the US legal code. Okay, so what happens here that we have correspondence, but we have a correspondence not with a fact in the world, but rather a correspondence with an objective correlation between two things. In this case, the legality of abortion and the US legal code. But if we take the expression or the predicate white, which is a physical predicate, this predicate is not normative. Hence, it is not a correlation notion. Accordingly, the sentence X is white is true if and only if X is right in the world. We have here only one correspondence. So we can say that because of the normative character of ethics or of morality, the pattern of correspondence in the moral domain is different and more complex than the pattern of correspondence in the physical domain. In the physical domain, we have a correspondence between a sentence or what a sentence says and something in the world. In the moral and legal case, we have a correspondence between what a sentence says and an objective correspondence between what it talks about and a certain human value or a certain legal code. A code, this is a more complex kind of correspondence. Conclusion. Moral values are values created by our civilization. As such, they are real. That is, things that we create are real. They are our creation. They are the creations of real objects, and as such, they are added to the world. They are real things in the world. Moral statements are normative. As such, they are correlation statements. There is a correlation between a moral statement and a certain human value. Either there is a correlation between a moral statement and a certain human value, or there is no such correlations. Specifically, X is good if and only if X accords with or is correlated with a relevant moral value. Accordingly, moral statements are true if and only if what they say is correlated with relevant human values, if and only if what they say is objectively correlated with a relevant human value. Saving John's life is good. The sentence, saving John's life is good, is true if and only if the action that it talks about, saving John's life, accords with or is correlated with a relevant moral value. If it is not correlated with a relevant moral value, this sentence is false. If it is correlated with a relevant moral value, correlated objectively, in fact, then the sentence is true. Since it is a matter of fact, what are the human values, and in particular, what are the moral values, it is a matter of fact whether saving John's life accords with such a value. Thank you.
Okay, let's first thank the speaker for the very thoughtful, insightful, and wonderful lecture. Okay, okay. Now is our time for our interlocutor, Professor Yong's time. You can first give some comment or question. Okay, please.
Right. Thanks, Professor Sher, for this wonderful talk. So I did prepare some slides. So can you see the slide?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Excellent. So the comments were partly based on the paper and the PPT you sent before, and some of those questions are related to the second talk. So I did raise some questions at the first talk, but those questions were based upon the second talk. So I'm going to repeat some of those questions here. So the first kind of questions I had in mind when I read the paper and the PPT were about the value of moral truth. So you did make the following. I think you did make the following statement about value in general, and so I think this would apply to your discussion today about moral values. So it seems like for you a moral value gives rise to or is associated with a cluster of moral norms, and this cluster in turn gives rise to a property, the property of satisfying the moral norms. So I think a lot of what you said about the correlation fits with what you said before. And also you, the second talk, you did talk about the immanence, transcendence, and the normativity of moral truth. So about truth in general, I think it also applies to moral truth, right? Then you talk about the conflicts and the competition among human values. I assume that can also be applied to the conflicts and competition among human moral values, right? So based on these three claims you made before, and with application to moral discussions, I have the following three questions related to them. So the first question, right? So beauty is a value, happiness is a value, meaningfulness of life as a value, and life as a value, telling truth as a value, etc. Some of those values might not be reducible to or give rise to norms or properties. In other words, maybe some non-reductionist approaches to moral values. So, when you talked about the values in general, I had this question in mind, and this intuition becomes much stronger when you discuss moral values, because I think our intuition is about the non-reductive nature of moral values is much stronger than our non-reductive intuition about values in general. So I was thinking, when we ask what is a caring mother, right? A caring mother, I mean, a mother who's caring, caring, I think is a value, it's a moral value. It's very difficult to give very accurate descriptions about the kind of the cluster of norms or properties to describe a caring value. It varies from culture to culture, and also it varies from family to family. So I want to know whether you share this non-reductive approach to moral values, because your theory or your claim seems to commit to a very strong, consistent, reductive approach to moral values. Then here's a second question. Okay, let's see. Right. So the second question is how to understand the immanence of moral truth. Are moral truths more immanent than non-moral truths, such as truths in physics? So again, when I was thinking about the immanence of truth in general, seems makes sense, and it seems like the immanence of moral truth seems to be much, the intuition is much stronger than the immanence of non-moral truth, right? I mean, it will kind of naturally lead to kind of subjectivism or skepticism, relativism, right? So if we follow this intuition, so I want to know, do you have anything to say about the comparative understanding of the immanence of moral and non-moral truth? Then the last question is on this point is about the comparative of values. So you did say, I mean, at least in the paper, right? And certain circumstance saying what's false may be preferable to telling the truth. I think this statement is more relevant today when we discuss moral values, right? Because telling the truth in this context is clearly a moral value. So thus, in this situation, when the value of truth is in conflict with another value, we may prioritize another value. However, is there truth underlying the above choice? So this is indeed a choice when we face this competition, right? You say in this situation, maybe telling the truth is not as desirable as not telling the truth, right? So I was wondering whether this claim assumes, right, this is the right choice. This is the choice you should make. So there could be two answers to this question. One is if there is a truth underlying the above choice when we face this moral dilemma, right, then it would mean that the truth is, after all, the most important value. So again, this is more relevant to today's talk. It seems like truth compared to other values, including moral values, is the most important value at all. So that would be in conflict with the above statement, right? Because you did say selling was false, maybe preferable to telling the truth, right? On the other end of the dilemma is if there is no truth, after all, underlying the above choice, that would mean the choice of values is relative, right? And that's not good. The latter option seems to conflict with our intuition about truth. And I think the latter option would particularly render your view inconsistent in some sense. So those are the three questions related to the first point. So I'm going to raise a couple questions about the second point. So the scope, I think the scope of moral values. So a couple questions here. So this is a very core claim you made. Doing X is good if only if doing X is positively correlated with moral values. So I have a couple questions related to this essential claim. So doing X refers to actions, and this definition seems to limit the moral discussion to actions. In other words, the definition is only applicable to action-oriented ethics. Right. So, I mean, you are not saying that this definition is exclusive, but you did bring about Kant and Jiang Stu-Mia, and they are action-oriented moral philosophers, right? So, while I was reading that, I was thinking, okay, how about moral traits, right, such as compassion, empathy, etc. It's interesting. You did talk about Hume's discussion about empathy and compassion, right? So moral traits are not necessarily identical or reducible to moral actions, in the sense that traits in general are not necessarily identical or reducible to actions. So I'm very interested at how you deal with this kind of category of properties that are crucial for a type of moral philosophy, like virtue ethics, right? Aristotle and some Chinese philosophers. Then the second question related to this point is, so the above definition, right, this biconditional definition here, can this definition work with non-realist understanding of moral values? If we just look at this definition and this bicondition, it does not say much about the realist commitment, right? The realism commitment. But you mean you did emphasize at the beginning and at the end the double correspondence relations and the truth relations in some way can be read as related to the realist claim, but even there, I don't see. I mean, the connection is not strong. So I think you have this separated commitment to the realism. Maybe you can spell out more, right? Why this definition? In order for this definition alone to work, you need a realist commitment. Maybe somehow the realism has already been built into the understanding here, or if combined with a non-realist commitment, it will create a serious challenge to this definition. So those are some of the questions I had, but thanks for the talk. It's very, very rich, and I learned a lot.
Okay, thank you very much for your question. As in my first lecture, you asked really excellent questions, and they also lead me to think more about these things. And so I'm really grateful for your questions, and let me try to answer them as best I can at this point. Okay, so your first question was, you said, the value of moral truth is a moral value. I said that the value of moral truth is a moral, I talked about the value of moral truth, and I said that moral values give rise to moral norms, and then also to moral properties. And the property is the property of satisfying the moral value. And that's correct. And then you mentioned that the immanence, transcendence, and normativity of truth in general applies also to moral truth, and that is also correct. In the case of moral truth, we first say something about a moral, we say something about a moral statement. We say that what it is, what it says, is correlated with a moral value. And then we go outside that, we transcend, and we make the normative statement that it is correct that there is an objective correlation between the moral act and this value. Okay, and so we have immanence, transcendence, and normativity. And you also said that I talked about conflicts between the norm of truth and other norms. You said also correct conflict in the as well, not just with respect to truth. And that's in fact not surprising, because the moral domain is a normative domain, and the truth domain is also a normative domain. And so in the normative domain in general, such conflicts may arise. Sometimes it's more important to abide by one value than another, and these can be two moral values, or they can be a moral value and a truth value. And so, yeah, that's perfectly correct. And then your first question was, you said there are many kinds of values, not just moral values and truth values. Beauty is a value, and there are many other kinds of values. And some of the norms, you said, do not give rise to some of the values. These values do not give rise to norms or properties. And well, let's think about the value of beauty. This is an open question. Okay, that is why I said in my talk that in order to settle such questions, we have to look and see. We have to examine the aesthetic domain on its own terms and see whether the aesthetic domain is in this respect similar to the moral and the truth domain or different from it. Now, I'm not a specialist in aesthetics, but I think that there is a certain desire for those who take beauty seriously to try to have certain norms of beauty. And if you have these norms, then you have also the property, a property that satisfies this norm, these norms, a certain object that satisfies these norms is beautiful. The question is, and I think you are right, that in the case of beauty, there is really a case where it is perhaps least clear whether, in fact, beauty is in the eye of the beholder or beauty is in the object itself. And there is here really an open question, what kind of value the value of beauty is. Is the value of beauty, does the value of beauty call for subjective evaluations of beauty, or does it call for objective evaluations of beauty? And I think that that does raise something really significant and relevant to what I'm saying. And that is, in the case of in the moral domain, in my view, there is an objective morality. In the beauty domain, it is an open question for me, at least, whether there is. And if there are no objective norms of beauty, then it would seem that there's no objective truth in the aesthetic domain. Okay, so the aesthetic domain in that case will not be open to truth, will not be subject to norms of truth, whereas if there are objective aesthetic norms, then it is open, it is subject to the norms of truth. So that's really an open question and a question that we need to examine. You said, you brought also the example of a caring mother, being a caring mother. And you mentioned that being a caring mother is something that we naturally think about as relative to culture. And here again, this is again an open question. My understanding is that in all cultures, we value the being caring of mothers. And so caring is something that we value in all cultures. But different cultures may understand some behaviors differently as caring or non-caring. For example, in cultures that value, some culture may value strict attitudes toward children. So to care about your children among these things is to make sure that they are, say, obedient. In another culture, forcing children or pushing children to be obedient is considered not caring. You don't care about they themselves want to do, and therefore you are not caring about them. And this again raises factual questions. How much in common we need there to be a statement or effect of caring in order for the value of truth to apply to this situation. And so again, and it is well known that in the moral domain and in the value domain, there are a lot of open questions, there are a lot of ambiguity. And I think actually that we don't want to eliminate it altogether, because that's the reality of this domain. So we don't want to turn a domain in our theories, turn a domain which is in fact full of ambiguities and subtleties into a domain which has no ambiguities and no subtleties. So this really requires a further investigation of these particular questions, and then maybe deriving or not deriving some general conclusions from these particular cases. And so in this case, you characterized my approach as reductive. I think it is reductive in some sense, but not in another. It is reductive in the sense that it reduces moral actions into actions that accord with human values. But it is not reductive in a sense that it does not force, it allows for a human value to allow some flexibility in different cultures and in different people. So some people can understand caring in one way, and some may understand it in another way. Some ways of understanding it are within the objective value of caring, and some ways of understanding it may be outside it, and these are open questions. But I think that my approach allows for some flexibility, quite a lot of flexibility within each human value. Now, your second question was how to understand the immanence of moral truth. You said, are they more immanent than physical truth? And you seem to think that the immanence of moral truth is stronger than intuitively than the immanence of physical truth. Now, my sense is that there's the same degree of immanence, that once you talk about truth, there's immanence. That's what there is. And so when you have a question, a statement that says snow is white, and you have a statement which says this woman is caring, this saving John's life is good, then these are statements about something other than the statement and something other than truth. It is a statement about, the property of caring, and it is a statement about the action of saving, and or a statement about the color of snow. So these are statements that are about something which is outside ourselves. And to the extent that what they are about is something real, it's a real thing to care about, say, one's children. It's a real thing to be white. It's a real thing to save someone's life. To the extent that these are statements about real things, then they are equally immanent. So that would be my view. Now, you said that under certain circumstances, saying what is false may be preferable to saying what is true, I said. And that's correct. And what happens in the moral domain? In the moral domain, we can have a moral dilemma. Is truth the more important value, or moral values more important than the value of truth? If there's no truth, then truth is relative. And it seems to me I tend to treat them as equally important. Take, for example, the case of, the famous case that Kant talked about, murderer in the door. And so you have a friend that you care about, and then someone comes to your door and they tell you that they want to murder this person, and they ask you where this person is. And the question is, should you tell them, and you know where this person is, should you tell them the truth or should you not tell them the truth? And in my view, this is really a real dilemma. And I don't think that the value of truth in this case triumph over the value of saving your friend's life. And so I myself would think that truth is not, there is a sense in which truth is important for all values. But there's also a sense in which I think it is not superior to other values. That would be my view. And finally, your last two questions, you said about the scope of moral values. You said doing X is good. And what I said is doing X is good, if and only if doing X is positively correlated with a moral value. It seems to you that this limits morality, the moral domain, to actions. What about moral traits like empathy, which you say is not correlated with moral values, or more generally, virtue ethics? Okay, first I want to say that I do not think that the moral domain is limited to actions. But I wanted, to introduce a new principle for the first time. And I think that the case of action is a natural case in which to explain it and present it. And then you are perfectly right, it requires more work in order to apply to other things. And when you talk about empathy, there are things like empathy and sympathy are sort of mixed things. You can think about them as psychological traits, but you can also think about them as moral traits. To the extent that they are moral traits, they are correlated with values, moral values. But to the extent that they are psychological traits, they are a matter of how our human mind or psychology works. They are factual questions. And so you do have that. When I talked about them as psychological traits. You need to have not every creature. I mean, stones cannot be moral or immoral. It's an open question whether animals can be moral or immoral. For humans to be moral, they need certain traits. One of them is empathy, which when we look at it normatively, we say, not psychologically, we say it is a moral trait. And so that's how I will look at it. And finally, can my definition work without realism with respect to human values? But there is, okay. So here I will say two things. On one level, yes, because even if I don't regard human values realistically, there can still be a fact of the matter where is a correlation between a certain act and a human value. Even if it's, say, a fictional thing, it's not a real thing, but there can be a fact about whether there is a correlation or whether there is no correlation. So this is in some way sufficient for correspondence. But what I wanted to say, still there's a question, what is the truth about ethics? You know, how things are in a moral domain. And my understanding of the moral domain, where as a result both of certain conflicts and as a result of certain vision of human life, we create human values, that makes them real, because things that we create are real, things that we introduce into the world. And so what I would say is that yes, correspondence by itself maybe does not require realism with regard to human values, but I believe that human values are real. Therefore, my own view of truth in ethics is perhaps strongly realist, whereas one can have a less strongly realist but still realist view of truth in ethics. Okay, thanks again very much.
Great. There are a few people raising questions, so I will not do follow-ups. But again, thanks for this very great talk.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have some questions from the audience. Okay, first the question from Professor Krajewski. Okay, please.
Yes, thank you. I have a question. In fact, I have written the question on the chat so that perhaps everybody can see it more easily. So, almost every action is positively correlated with a moral value, and at the same time, it is negatively correlated with another moral value. For example, saving one person can mean ignoring another person in need, you know, things like that. This fact seems to imply that often sentences about the goodness of doing something morally relevant are true and false at the same time. Is this a problem for your approach? Because it would seem that almost, I would say even perhaps every sentence of this kind, that doing X is good, is both true and false at the same time. Does it make the whole theory somehow irrelevant in a way? What do you think?
Okay, thank you very much. This is a good question. First, let me relate to this in the physical domain. There is also a sense in which the sentence "snow is white" agrees about one physical situation, one aspect of the physical world, but not about another aspect of the physical world to which it is indifferent. And so, for example, snow is white is true because that aspect of the world that has to do with snow is such that the color of snow is white. But it is not true because in the world grass is green. Okay, and so there are many facts about the world, but not all of them are relevant for the truth of the sentence snow is white. So each sentence is directed at some aspect of the world. And what is relevant is whether that aspect is as the sentence says, not whether there are other aspects which are not as the sentence says. And in some way, I think that this holds also in the moral domain. So when I say doing X is good, then it depends what X is as to which value is relevant. Okay, and so if I say saving life, the life of a particular person is good, then this relates to a value of saving life, but it is not related to the value of don't ignore another person. And so I would say, what I would say is that this sentence has to have a correlation which is relevant to what he talks about, not to other things that it might talk about, but it doesn't talk about. At the same time, what the question you asked can be reformulated as follows. Suppose we have the question, saving John's life and ignoring Jim's life, Jim's desires, is good. Okay. And here, what I would say is that in this sentence, the target are two things. It's a conjunction. It's one has to do with saving life, and one has to do with ignoring a person's desires. And this will be a case where this will be resolved, I think, with the, you will have to resolve the moral issue of which thing is more important, saving the life of one person or not ignoring another person. And my sense is that in this case, most of us would say that saving life is more important than not ignoring a person. And so we will say that the sentence is true, but someone may disagree with this. It's an open question. What is the balance of the two values that are involved? And in accordance with what is the actual balance between them, the sentence will be true or false. So, and again, I fully agree that especially in the moral domain, there are many cases where there are conflicts in moral values, and we have to resolve them before we can decide whether the sentence is true or false.
Yes, generally I agree, of course, with what you've said. The point is that it seems that we need to decide what is the relevant value or something like that, and this may be very difficult, and maybe some of the most important moral considerations are about exactly this point. And here the whole theory about the correlation, etc., is not of no help, because we still need to decide. And I agree that in the physical case there is something similar, in fact, that we need to point out what are the relevant aspects of the world. That's absolutely true. And so in this sense, I think that the basic logical approach that we always have to somehow rely on is this, what is usually called the pragmatic level, rather than just semantic, which you seemed to really operate within only.
Let me just say briefly that I'm fully aware of these complexities. And I think that, it's one of the tasks of a theory of truth is, for example, to explain what happens to truth in the case of scientific change. At one point, you think that the world is this way, so it has to be correspondence with such and such a state. Then you find out that it's another way. Then the correspondence shifts to another state. So in this sense, I think that there is, complexity, and that it has to be taken into account. And in this sense, there's some element of pragmatism here, where you have to weigh different things and decide what is the overall best approach. But at the same time, I think that truth is something factual, and even it might be difficult to arrive at the final word about truth, but still, this is what gives us the motivation to settle all these moral dilemmas and all these physical dilemmas. And that's why it's positive, that it tells us, don't just say, it's unclear and we will just approach it pragmatically, but you need to explore and investigate further, both in the moral domain and in the physical domain. That's at least my view. Thanks very much.
Okay, the next question from the host of Prof. Cheng.
Okay, I have a question. Yeah, Gila, in your top-level account of moral truth, you seem to suppose that their moral value, which is objective and universal, shared by all the humans. If I understand you correctly, I have deep doubt about this supposition, because two reasons. The first, we humans have different and even complicating moral values. You talk about 7 knives, but there is a Bible which eat people, eat old people, eat dead children, eat other people. If without eat people, I cannot survive. This is a real situation. There is a Tibet custom. Usually, we have to treat dead people and their corpse with dignity, respect. But in Tibet, there is a custom. They cut the dead people's corpse, into pieces and threw them into sky and let eaten by eagle. We will say this is cruel or something like that, but this is so that means they are different, radically different, and even complicating moral value, not totally objective and universal. This is one reason. The second, our moral value is always in the process of evolution. As the civilization develops, we become more moral than before. For example, maybe in some period of past, robbery is morally good, especially to his family, to his community, to his local people. If no robbery, their community, their family cannot survive. But with law, we don't literally speaking. Nobody will recognize robbery as moral value. So I think if your account of moral truth is based on moral value, which is objective and universal and shared by all the people, I think this supposition is challengeable. That's my question.
Okay, thank you very much. And I fully agree with you that this is, like many other things, it's challengeable. And but let me try to put things more in perspective and also respond to some of your challenges. And so let me start with what you talked about last, and this is evolution. I fully agree that evolution plays a significant role in the development of human values. But I think that to understand human life and human civilization, we have to go beyond evolution. And I think it is compatible with evolution that some things develop outside the domain of evolution. Evolution is compatible with different kinds of development of human society and humans, even psychology perhaps. And so even though I don't want to deny the importance of evolution, what I'm talking about is what goes beyond evolution. And I believe that there are aspects of human lives that cannot be explained just by evolution. So that's one thing. And when we go into this level, there is really there are really deep questions here. I think, for example, I don't think it is true that there's a linear line in which we become more and more moral. If you look just in the middle of the last century, there was Nazi Germany with the Holocaust, which was an enormous regress in the morality of people who were part of this culture. And so, and this is part of what I talked about when I talked about the post-truth crisis, that we cannot take it for granted that we are getting better and better and that we appreciate truth more and more. It is really, there's a very strong element of choice here, and people can decide, can choose to follow and improve their moral values, but can also choose to go away from them and to become less moral and to care less about truth. And that's why it's so important what people are doing today in society, whether they just let it go or whether they try to convince others that it's very important to respect the moral values and the truth values and other human values. And so that's how I see it. Now, you talked about the situation in which different cultures have different moral values. And so this is also, I fully agree, it's an open question. But when I look at human civilization, I see a lot of similarities between the values of people in different cultures. There are some differences. I mean, I talked about abortion. Some people in the United States, even in one society, think that women should be, it's moral for women to be allowed to decide whether to have an abortion or not under normal conditions, and some things that it's immoral. And there are differences, and there are also, of course, differences in cultures, as we talked about what is a caring mother can be considered somewhat differently in different cultures. And that is why I talked about a few levels about moral values, moral norms, and moral norms. And what I want, my observation is that in the big pictures, there are similarities between the values of different cultures. Most cultures would say that just killing children for pleasure is morally bad. And most cultures respect truth, say that lying is morally problematic, even though it might be justified under some circumstances. And many cultures would say that it's the relation between parents and children are very important. It's very bad to behave immorally toward your children, even though there might be differences in views. And my sense is that the similarities are sufficiently central and stable and important that you can talk about human values. I don't think it's a priori or necessary. I think the whole domain of human values is contingent. But I think that as it happened, human civilization, and I think luckily so, developed in such a way that there is some basic agreement about human values, and that's why we can talk to each other and we can try to convince each other, and also we can accept some of our differences. So again, everything in the moral domain, and for example, is, there are so many subtleties and there are so many conflicts at different points of view. But I think there is sufficient similarity to talk about the human value of truth, the human value of justice, and at the same time to recognize that there are differences between the ways that different people understand what is justice, what is just, and understand what is to be caring about your children. And this is not trivial. This is something that really requires action and resolution and action and on the one hand and understanding on the other hand. So truth is not a simple thing in these cases, but still the basic values, I think, are common, or there are sufficiently many human values that are common to our civilization that we can talk about, and truth is one of them, so we can view truth as a universal human values, but although only contingently, it's possible that our civilization will develop in such a way that people will stop treating truth as a human value, and that would be a very problematic and very significant change, a development in human civilization.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, the next question from Dr. Fanda, please.
Okay, thank you, Professor, for your talk. So I think what I have is a very general curiosity. So I wanted to talk a little bit about perhaps the opposite of your view, namely expressivism. So to my understanding, there are two main motivations for expressivism. One is that they don't have the obligation to explain moral truth. But since you're offering an account of moral truth, I think that doesn't count as a advantage of the expressivists. But I want to focus on the second alleged advantage of it, namely expressivism can offer like a straightforward account of why moral commitments are motivational. So according to them, they treat moral commitments as conative states, right? Which are supposed to be motivational intrinsically. So I'm curious about how your account of moral truth fares with the motivational efficacy of moral judgments or moral commitments in general. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for your question. I think that, so you are right that if we explain, when we explain the moral domain, we have to understand the relations between moral judgments and actions, and the fact that they motivate us, our moral judgments motivate us to act in a certain way and not in another way. And I also agree that, you know, our dispositions or tendencies or feelings are motivational, that they motivate us to behave in a certain way. But I think that having a moral value is also motivational, because the moral values, on my understanding, we choose to have a moral values. We commit ourselves to a moral values. And this commitment involves a commitment to certain actions and not others. So moral values are not just things that there are in the world and that they are like stones, that they don't have a motivational force. But because they are values, and they are values that we choose, they motivate us. And they are not the only thing that motivate us. But I think their motivation is in some way, at least in some cases, more relevant than the motivation of our emotions and our dispositions, because our emotions sometimes motivate us to behave in a way which is immoral. And if we hold the moral values, then they can only motivate us to behave morally. And so, yeah, so that's what I think about this issue.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I see another question from the audience. Okay. Professor Guo Jianping. Okay, please.
Thank you for your so splendid report. because there are some symbols. So may I share my document? May I share my screen?
Oh.
Yeah, I write here. Maybe I can express myself clearly. This question is relevant with this topic and the last topic. First is in your paper, Truth and Transcendence. You command a methodological turn to avoid the paradox in material good theory. That is, the process of constructing the theory should be such that the addition of new principle to the theory generally involves the updating of all its principle updating, rather than creating a conjunction of independent principles. I think this is a good idea that we can create a theory of truth and avoid paradox. So according to this idea and following your ideas on the substantivism theory of truth in your book, Epistemic Friction, I went on to formulate a schema for your substantivism theory of truth. That is this, like this. This symbol is updating. And this is your equivalent schema. And this immanence, transcendence, and normativity in your fundamental principle of truth. So this it will put up with in my forthcoming paper on your substantivism theory of truth, in which I introduce them. So it's here, and I think this form, this is from a HH transcendence view. The immanence proposition P is true if and is P. Meanwhile, this schema is also a norm of the theory truth, embodies the human value. And I also think that this schema is suitable for the for your moral truth. Just here, as it provides a complete to accommodate various explanations. Here, the truth may be explained by manifold correspondence theories as needed. So I think it is suitable for the for today's moral truth is that it also can be explained by manifold correspondence theories that you need. So I think it is more important is that the important role of logic as a base of the substantivism theory of truth is clearly showed in this schema. I always like to explore the important role of logic in our philosophical investigations. So I wonder if you agree with me such a model schema for your substantivism theory of truth. Do you think it is adequate for your theory of truth? This is one question. The first question. The second is, Jano, you give us some examples to explain your moral truth. Use that equivalent schema. But seeing life is good. It's so clear and obvious. But the world is so complex. So many people have considered and discussed about these questions. So they all say that there are many things that we may have different views depend on the person's standpoint. So we cannot give a general idea of the moral value. So you think, do you, yes, I have known that you, we cannot have the universal moral value, indeed, in many things, in many acts, such as trolley problem. It's a difficult thing. So, as to so many examples, you always give the answer is that it is an open question. But I think if you said that it's an open question, in some extent means we may see it on our respective views. Thus, it may lead to relativism. So I think if we as to the operate, maybe it is difficult. So can you give us a solution? Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks very much to Jian Ping for her questions. And let me relate to the first question first. This is the question of the equivalence schema and how it's relevant to moral truth, and in what sense the substantivist approach, how we see it from the point of view of the substantivist approach and from a logical point of view. And so first I would say, yes, the equivalence schema is still relevant. And we can say, going to the obvious examples that I used first, saving John's life is good, is true, if and only if saving John's life is good. But as a substantivist, I'm interested in explaining the letter, the condition. What does it mean? Under what conditions is saving John's life is good? And the way I explain it, I think in a way which is both substantive and general, is by saying that this is the case if and only if saving John's life is correlated with a relevant human value. And it is because it is correlated with a relevant human value, the value of saving life, that the sentence is true. So I will accept the equivalence schema, but I will say that if we want to understand the truth conditions of certain sentences, we cannot make do just with the trivial statement P is true even only if P, but we really have to relate to the conditions which are relevant, which go beyond just saying P. And so that's how I look at it. And I also agree with what you said, that, and that's a point I didn't relate to in these talks, and that when we give a substantive theory of truth, we don't just add things, more conjunctions to the equivalence schema, but rather, if we understand it better, then we update the original equivalence schema. And one of the ways in which we update it by requiring transcendence prevents paradoxes like the liar paradox and other semantic paradoxes. Now, with respect to your second question, which said that, yes, saving life is obvious, but what about the trolley problem, which is much more complicated? And you say, well, your answer is it's an open question, but this is not satisfying enough. I mean, we want more than that. And if we just accept it as an open question, it leads to relativism. For you, it's true. For another person, it's false. But that's actually, is not exactly what I'm saying. One reason I think truth is so important is that it reflects our attitude that when there are open questions, we cannot just accept them. This is an open question, end of story. If that's what we did, you're right, there would not be truth. There would objective truth. There would be relativism. One of the reasons that truth is so important for us is that it requires us to investigate the open questions and not to be satisfied with just leaving them open. If objective truth is important, then you cannot just leave the questions open. It's okay to say that at this stage, for me, it is open. But it is not okay to say this is the end of the story. And so I think that human beings, that our humanity requires us to investigate the open question. And this goes in line with what I said, that knowledge is so important for us. It's important for us to know what is the truth, or in the case of the trolley problem. We can, on the one hand, we need to appreciate its complexity, but we also, talking about truth, pushes us not to just let it be and say, oh, it's open, there's nothing more to say, but rather it requires us to work more. It requires us to investigate more. And that's one of the reasons that I think truth is so important, that having objective truth is really integrated in our conception of human life and what humans ought to do. And that's why it is a human value. So that's what my response to your question.
Yeah. You know, when I listen to your report, I would like to get an answer to the moral truth. So, following your answering that, first we know that the truth in your moral truth is so important, and another thing we should do is to found the correct, or found the general universal view on the moral truth. But yes, I know, but we always have the expect that we can get this from your idea. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, we have two questions from the audience who attended the lecture from the Shushiji platform. But due to time limit, I will read these two questions together, okay? And then you can decide, maybe you can give a brief response. Yeah, one question is that what is the relevant moral value? It says that there are many sorts of moral value, and some are in conflicted with each other. It seems that this question is similar with the question from the Professor Krajewski. Yeah. Another question is that you say that when discussing about motivation, we normally accept an explanation for a moralist. If moral values are chosen by us, then how to explain a moralist who don't have that motivation, even if he admits the existence of moral values? Yeah, maybe you give a brief.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yes, I think, you really describe the situation as it is. So I think that being human is something complicated, and that there is some kind of vision that was developed in our civilization for one reason or another, which is connected with human values and with moral values. But there are also so many other forces that are acting on us, and there are also so many alternative visions that we can have. And for that reason, it's not trivial and it's not maybe lasting that truth is a human value for our civilization, but I think it sort of depends on each one of us whether it will continue to be a human value of our civilization, whether our civilization will continue to be human or will turn out to be inhuman or neutral with respect to the human values. And that's why I think that to understand truth is partly to understand this subtle and complex and sensitive role that it plays in human life. That on the other hand, it is very important, and if we lose truth, our life will change radically in many ways. And on the other hand, but it's not guaranteed to remain. So in the end, human choice is so important. And so truth is a certain ideal, is a certain part of our vision of our humanity. And as such, it makes a huge difference. It motivates us to behave in one way and not in another. But it cannot be taken for granted. And so there's a job for all of us to do, for humans to do, and that is to try to preserve it in our society. And that's an important job, but it's not guaranteed to be successfully performed. So I fully agree with, the complex way in which you describe the situation with respect to human values and the human value of truth.
Okay, so seeking for the truth is a moral fault, is a moral value. Do you think so? Yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay. Now it's time to. We have run out of the time. We thank the speaker for this very wonderful lectures. Also, we have very good discussions. Also, we thank his previous two wonderful lectures. Also, thank all the interlocutors. Thank all the colleagues from the University Planford and in Zoom. Also, finally, we thank the technical support from Xue Shuzhi. And finally, we thank the host, Professor Cheng to make this lecture at Wuhan University possible. Okay, it's time to say goodbye. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye. Okay.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.